I'm going to show you today how to set up a slate frame. So this is one of our slate frames that we've got on our website. It's a standard slate frame. This particular one is 18 by 19. So you can just see with this picture here, you can go from different sizes with these. You can put the little pegs in and it changes the size of it. Now, let me just put that one over there. The one that I've got here is a 12 by 19. So it's slightly shorter on the tape here. Okay, so we're going to attach our fabric onto here and then it will keep it really, really taut. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to attach some tape of some sort. It could be this is bias binding, it could be a ribbon or anything, something that gives a little bit more substance to these sides. Okay, so I'm just using bias binding for today, and I'm just going to take the bias binding and I'm just going to put it along these edges here. So I'm going to take 1, 2. Okay, I'm going to move these sides out of the way for the time being, and then obviously we'll bring them back later. And I'm just going to move the pegs to over here so they're out of our way. Okay, so there's our bias binding. We'll just wrap that up and just leave it over to the side because we don't need any more than what we've got there. Okay, so let's move these out of the way. And we're just going to get a thread. Now I've got a nice purple thread, so it's really dark. You can see the thread going on the side there, and it's just a matter of laying that down and just doing a little running stitch along the edge there. So we're just going to come along, just do a quick little running stitch, and what this does is it provides just that little bit more substance to your material. And it doesn't pull on the material quite as much when we're putting in. You can pin this on if you want, so I'm just going to put a few little pins in just to hold that in place. Get some straight pins. These are my mum's pins, these, so they could be any manner of shape, I'm afraid. So let's just pop that on there like that. Let's move that over. Let's get a few of those out. See, I did say we've got a banana pin there. Nice little bent shape, but I mean, it doesn't really matter if they're bent, as long as they go in, that's all that matters. So we're just going to straighten that up on the edge there. Okay, and then we can put a nice little running stitch in. Just get one more in, and then that should do us. So we need to do this on both sides. So we're literally going to now, just let me straighten that thread out because it's got a little bit tangled. We're just going to come along here and put a few running stitches all the way along this fabric. Okay. This can also be known as a basting stitch because this is literally going to come out at the end. It's not going to stay in. So a basting stitch is always a temporary stitch. And you can take those pins out as you go along. Okay, so just coming along here like that with our running stitch. Just be careful because the material can be susceptible to creasing, so if you do your running stitches and you pull it too tight, then you can get creasing. So just be careful that you don't crease up your material. So probably just about 3 stitches, and then you just want to pull that through your fabric. Okay, and then you'll do exactly the same on the other side. So we're going to put 2 pieces on. I thought we'd go for a nice little pink colour here and a nice purple thread to stitch it on with, and then you know, it's really nice and visible, but also a little bit on the pretty side because we all like a bit of pretty, don't we? So there we go. We're just going to come along here and then we'll take our pins out as we go along. So there we go. So we've got these edges on, and that just provides extra substance to our material. So what we need to do now is we need to attach these edges onto our fabric. Okay, so we're going to do them this way round, and we're going to do this edge, and we're going to do that edge. Okay, so there's different ways, and different people say different ways of attaching this on. You can either do it so that it's stitched around like that. I tend to attach it so it's a herringbone stitch along the edge here. That seems to be pretty nicely attached afterwards. So I'm just going to put it up there. I'm going to bring it down here, and we're going to pin it on first. Okay, we need to put quite a few pins in. So let's make sure it's nice and central. And I'm just going to pin it like this, just as I did with the bias binding. Okay, we need to put a few more pins in this time though. Let's make sure it's down enough. Some of those pins were a little on the big side. A little on the big side. That's a little bit of a contradiction in terms. Okay, and just as you're doing it, just give it a little bit of a stretch across this way, because obviously when you're stretching it that way, once we've got this attached and we're putting in the side pieces, it will be stretched. So you need to make sure that you're giving it a little bit of a stretch now, so that it doesn't pucker up when you're doing the side pieces and you're stringing it up. Okay, so just put in a couple more, and then we can stitch that on. Just bring that down, pin that in. Like that. That's another one of the banana ones. Okay, so that's nicely pinned in, and we just need to do our stitching across here now. Okay, so we're just going to come up here, just make sure that that's there. I'm going to start at this side, and we're just going to stitch it on to our fabric. So I'm going to turn it around this way, just making sure that I keep the fabric straight all the time, because as I said, it can get quite easily crushed, and then it won't lie as flat. You'll have creases in there. So we're just going to do a little herringbone stitch. Just let me move that up there so it's easy for me to stitch. Okay. Oops. Just be careful you don't catch on those pins. So it's all about just attaching this on to this bias binding here, or the binding on the slate frame. So we're just attaching it on, and this attaches it on nicely. So you could put a few running stitches on if you wanted to. It's entirely up to you how you attach it on. Different people have different methods. This is the one that I actually prefer to use. And then it just applies it on really nicely. like I said, it's quite a time-consuming method of attaching. I don't tend to use this very often because it takes so long to set it up. And if you're doing this all the time, it's blooming forever. Why would you do this? So I'm all for quick. So I tend to use the bar frames because they're really, really quick to set up. But when you're doing demos and it's a bigger one, which is this, and it's got to be on there for quite some time, then it's this keeps it taut forever. I mean, the bar frames tend to, but this will keep it more taut. Okay, so we've got our two sides on our piece of work there, and they're nicely attached. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to put our side bars on. Okay, so the first thing we do is we just slot those in, and we need to slot it a little bit further up on one side so we can make sure we can get it in on the other side. So I'm just going to move that up so you can see what I'm doing there. This is rather a large frame, so it's likely to potentially go off camera at some point. Okay, so this is our 19-inch side and this is our 12-inch here. Okay, so we're just going to leave that like that for now, and we're just going to do the other side and slot that in. Okay, so we'll slot it in a little bit further on that side, and then we can get it in on this side. So these are, you know, fairly tight. They're not supposed to be dead weak. So we just need to make sure that that's almost even there, so that when we start to stretch it, it's pulling this nice and tightly. Okay, so if we just push that down a little bit and we get it to that peg there, okay, pop that peg in there. And then we can push this nice and tight, and we can see that this peg here is where we can get that taut. So this is nice and taut across here. Okay, so that's one peg in there and then the other peg in just there. And then we're going to do this side, and you can see this is all like really baggy here, and this is much tighter already. So we take the other two pegs, and I'm just going to push that up a little bit there. It's quite tight, so you just need to make sure that you, oops, I've just pushed my my thread off the side there. Just poked it off. Okay, so that one's in, and then we need to just push this one really tightly. At least my pegs haven't gone off the edge. So that's really nice and tight there. And so make sure these are on the inside. If they're on the outside, they're basically doing nothing. So this is nice and taut already. So what we need to do now is we need to start to pull this. Now, just make sure that, you know, that's not really got much more give than that. And that's not really got much more give than that. Okay, so that's great. I'm just going to push that peg all the way down, and I'm going to push that peg all the way down. Okay, so they're all the way through, and that'll give it a little bit of extra depth as well, because obviously if it's up to here and it's underneath here, then that gives it a little bit of an extra millimetre, and it holds that more in place as well, because these are sandwiching close to these edges. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to start stringing this edge up, and the thread that I tend to use is a crochet thread, so it needs to be quite a strong thread. It's not going to break easily, and it'll go through this edge and over this, so that it makes this really taut and pulls it nice and tight. So I'm just going to take a bit of that off my ball, and we'll carry on doing our stitching. So we just need to string up our edges now, and this is the thread that I have and that I use. So I tend to just leave it on the ball until I get to the end, and then I tighten it all up and knot it at that point, and then you know how much thread you need. So all we're going to do is we're just going to come up and down and around our material, and this was the purpose of this on the side here. It just makes it that little bit tighter. Let me just move these out of the way. Okay, so we're going to come up and around, and I'm going to do it about an inch apart with each one. Okay, so that they're all nice and tight. And what you'll find is when you get a certain amount down, then your thread will be really short here. So all you need to do is just take a little bit more off your bobbin and just pull it through like that. And that's why I just leave the thread on the bobbin. It just makes it much easier for doing this method of putting the string on. So we're just coming round, and we're going round again, and then again, bit short here, just pull some more of your thread through, and then we just pull it back when we get to the end. That's all we need to do. So we're just going to pull this through here and around again, And all of these are about 1 inch apart, as I said. Just let me move that over a little bit there. Okay, and then just make sure that your thread doesn't come out of your needle because it's getting a little bit on the short side here. Again, we need a little bit more, so I'm just going to unravel some of that thread there. And it's not too much more that we need, so let's see if we get away with that bit that I've pulled in there. Okay, so we're just going to pull that through, round. This is a little bit denser, this fabric, you see, so because you've got the 2 layers of the fabric, then it just makes it much better. It doesn't pull on your other material that you're actually stitching onto quite as much. And I would go all the way up to the end, which I can't quite get to because this isn't quite long enough now. So I'm just going to pull a little bit through, not a lot, and it's really quick to pull this through just like this. This also keeps more of a constant tension on the fabric that's on the surface. So we're just going to come up here like that. And then we're just going to do a little stay stitch. So we're going to just finish off our thread and ensure that that is nicely knotted off. Okay, so I'm going to do about 3 stitches there just to secure that into place. Okay, and then you can trim that off. So let's just trim a little bit of that off. And then what we need to do now is we need to make sure that this is nice and taut. So at the moment it's fairly loose. As you can see, these need to be really tight. Now, you don't want to pull them too tight on this side. You just want to pull them tight enough so that it's taut, but you're not dragging it over. So if I pulled that now, it would distort the fabric. Okay, so you just want to make sure that it's taut enough and it's consistently taut as well. Okay, so these are almost the same distance away from that bar. You can see how much extra thread that I'm pulling through here. Okay, and then obviously we get to the end, and this is where our thread is. And that's why I tend to leave it on the ball, because then you waste as little thread as possible. So we just need to chop this off here, and we're just going to do a little stay stitch on this side. Okay. I'm going to pull that up, and then I'm just going to pull this a little bit more taut. Okay. And then I'm going to finish this off on this side. You need to do probably a couple more stitches, and then we can do the other side. Okay, there we go. So that's one side. Now I'm just going to leave that there just in case I need to pull this tighter at any point. So it's best to leave this thread, and then obviously you've got that excess of thread that you can use later. Once you know that you've got the other side taut, you can just cut that off. So now we've strung up the other side. So we've got this side strung up and this side strung up, but we now need to make sure that it's very, very taut. So we're just going to pull these really tightly, and that's why it's really important to have a strong thread. So I'm just going to pull these tight like this, and then once I've done one side, and then going to do it again. And then you make sure that you get that consistency in your side. So we'll pull it all the way to there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim that off just there. And I'm going to do a temporary little stay stitch just here. So just to secure it in place a little bit, but you'll see the difference in how much extra we get in a minute. So I'm just going to do a little stay stitch there like that. Okay. I'm going to pull it fairly tight, and then I'm just going to pop that in there just for a second. Okay, and then I'm going to tighten it up again. Now, you might want to use something like a tool, not necessarily your fingers, which just means that it makes it a little bit easier. We can move that out of the way now to roll this over while you're doing your next one. And then what you can do is you can roll that around while you pull the next one. So you're rolling that round and you're pulling this. Rolling round and pulling, okay? So you're rolling around. Now, obviously, you know, we've done that once already. We've got quite a bit of extra thread on this next go, making sure that it's much more taut, okay? I'm just going to move that up a little bit. Makes it much easier if it's central for me to access. So I'm just going to move that up a little bit. I'm just going to tighten that one up, because the trouble is, if you don't keep hold of this taut, then these can slacken off. So it's a good idea to do this a few times, especially towards the end, and then it won't be as slack. Right, so I've pulled that now. And now what I'm going to do is just take that needle out, and I'm going to lift that thread up. So I'm just going to hold that tight there. Okay, hold that tight whilst I pull this thread through. I'm pulling that one tight now whilst I'm allowing this one to slacken off. Okay, so we'll do one more of that, and then we know that it's definitely tight enough, because you can see that there's still some slack there. So I'm just going to pull that up every time, and then by the time we get to the end, just be careful you don't trap your finger in. That's all I'd say. And then it makes it much, much tauter. Okay, so again, I'm just going to hold that thread really quite tight, and I'm just going to lift this thread out here. And then I'm going to start to pull my thread at the back. And then I'm going to pull that tight. Okay, so that should be enough now. I'm just going to hold that with my needle and let that go to there. Okay. And already again, I mean, there was only about this much thread and we've just gained that much extra thread, but you can see that this has gone slightly looser here already. So I'm just going to lift this up again and just make sure that it's much tighter. Okay, and then we're just going to lift that thread up again. Pull that nice and tight. Okay, so then we need to finish that thread off. Okay, and make sure that's really, really tight, because of course, if it's not, then it will slacken off. So I'd make sure you do a few stitches there, and that should be enough. Now we don't need to do anything with the other side. That is really nice and taut. And we can just trim that off and we can take that away. So that is your slate frame set up. Now obviously we did leave this tail here, so we can also cut that off as well. And that's really, really nice and taut and ready for us to start our stitching.